Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the strategy session. I am your host, Rick Wilson. I am joined tonight by the great Simon Rosenberg and Stuart Stevens. And tonight, folks, I know you might think we'd talk about the trial or the dog murderer or all the terrible things that are out there in the world. But you know what we're going to talk about tonight? Some good news for once. We're going to talk about why a lot of these polls that are thrown into your face every day are BS. Where the campaign really stands, why Joe Biden is having a pretty good run right now, why Donald Trump is in deeper trouble than he wants to admit, and also, look, we all watched this weekend as Joe Biden once again at the Correspondence Center went out there, was witty, was self-deprecating, was sharp, got the point across, and the contrast to watching Donald Trump sit in an icy courtroom every day couldn't be stronger. So I want to welcome Stuart and Simon both, and I want to talk about, to start off, Simon, give us the 30,000-foot view of the polling as you see it right now, and help folks understand why a lot of this polling that's being pumped out there like crazy, Trump is so far ahead in every swing state, is on a very thin reed.
Yeah, so look, my basic take on the election is that Joe Biden has been a good president. The country is better off. He has a very strong case for re-election. The Democratic Party is strong. We've been winning elections all across the country, raising tons of money, and we're very unified. And what do the Republicans have? I mean, they have Trump, who's the ugliest political thing that any of us have ever seen. And their party looks far more like a raging dumpster fire than it does a well-oiled political machine, right? And so so the whole theory, I think, of many of us about why we're sanguine or confident, quietly confident, is that both of you know, right? We're in the second inning of a 9-inning game. It's 1-1 in the second inning, right? We got a long game ahead of us. A lot's going to happen. But the notion that Donald Trump is ahead or leading, it's absurd, right? I mean, almost every poll taken in the last like 6 weeks has been within margin of error nationally. And now we start to see the state polls are starting to actually also now regularly get into margin of error. And CBS poll, even that poll today from Emerson showed that every single one of those states was within margin of error. My sense is that race has changed. We've gained probably 2 points or so in the last few weeks. You see it in the congressional generic. You're seeing the Senate polling is continuing to be remarkably strong all across the country for us. You're seeing the North Carolina gubernatorial race starting to look really ugly for the Republicans. I mean, I'll take where we are. We got work to do. I'm not going to be Pollyannish about this. I mean, we're not where we want to be. But this notion that Trump leads or the polls favor him is so outside of where the data is. It's ridiculous. It doesn't mean the Republicans aren't going to argue it. But I will just say to everybody, it's a 1-1 game in the second inning, right? We got a long way to go. And the truth is that the structural pieces of Joe Biden being this strong president, being a good president, the country being better off, versus just the unrelenting ugliness of Trump and MAGA, to me, makes it far more likely that we prevail, in the coming months.
Right. So talk a little bit about, and folks have to be reminded of this because, all of us are so immersed in politics over the years. The three big categories of polling that you've got these all citizens polling, then you've got registered voters, then you've got likely voters.
Yeah.
A lot of these polls are still in the more open category of unlikely voters, and they're migrating to registered voters.
Yeah.
But even a lot of the high quality ones haven't shifted over to likelies at this point, right?
Yeah, no, look, the way to think about this is there is a lot of evidence that what's happening in the electorate right now is that as people go through the process of going from being an adult to a registered voter, to a likely voter, to a voter, that Trump loses ground. I mean, that's what we saw in the Republican primaries, that when people had to make the decision, who am I really going to vote for? Not how I'm going to answer a poll when I'm not paying attention to the election. Right. We just had a lot of live fire tests on this all throughout the Republican primaries. And Trump underperformed public polling, consistently, right? And what that's suggesting is that even as Republican voters went to go vote, they just couldn't vote. A big chunk just couldn't pull the lever for Trump.
Right.
And the problem for the Republicans is that the whole country is about to go through that process, right? Where they're going to go through the process of being disengaged, not really caring, to having to actually recognize this is a two-person race against a genial man who's done a really good job as president versus this ugly thing over here, is dangerous and scary and all the other things. And what
Right.
the likely scenario, as based on the data we're seeing right now, right? This is not me being pie in the sky stuff, is that, we even saw it in that Marist poll last week. Joe
Mm-hmm.
Biden last week had the single best poll of the entire cycle for him,
Right.
in a poll that drilled down on likely voters. He was up 6 points. And again, so yes, Rick, there's a lot of evidence right now that when you're disengaged, you're like, whatever, right? But as people have had to go through this process of making a decision, Trump loses ground. And you saw that in New York 3. You saw that in
Mm-hmm.
the Alabama, where Republicans, because you guys know this better than anybody. I mean, it's my view that a big chunk of the Republican Party became loosened from the Republican Party after Dobbs. That Dobbs was like a bridge too
100%.
far. It was too much, right? And so there's this big chunk that just doesn't want to follow MAGA. And they're not following MAGA. That's part of the reasons these Trumpy candidates failed in the battlegrounds in 2022. And the likely scenario in this election is that Trump will not be able to bring the Republican coalition back together, and that Joe Biden will win. It doesn't mean that's what's going to happen, but to me, that still remains the likely scenario in this election.
I think that's right. I think there's been a degree of grasping by a lot of the Republicans at the idea that somehow Trump will pull off 2016 again and pull off this surprise.
Yeah.
But, Stuart, we've talked about this a lot. When you've got a person who essentially is now telling people very explicitly, we're going back to the past. We're going back to the past. We're not going to move forward as a country. We're going to go back, whether it's 1958 or 1858 in the minds of a lot of these people. And it strikes me that it's a weirdly passive and losing message for Trump to be carrying out there.
Yeah, I always like to say that, quote, Haley Barbour would say that at some point candidates ought to be for the future because it's going to happen anyway. And it just seems that the Republican Party has become a party of the past, and war with the modern world.
Right.
You see that, don't you, Simon, in the overall data?
Yeah, I mean, look, young people remain, despite a few crazy polls, right? Young people are still overwhelmingly, the most. We had a gold standard youth poll done. The Harvard IOP poll comes out once a quarter. It's got longitudinal data going back over 20 years,
Yep.
and it found that young people had the same level of vote intensity as they had 4 years ago at this time when we had record youth turnout. We've seen consistently in polling that this group of young people are more politically engaged and politically aware than any group of young people in the last 50 years, right? And Joe Biden was just slightly below his 2020 numbers. And so this idea that there's been some kind of significant erosion for Joe Biden with young people is just not there in the data. He's not where he wants to be. But what is Trump offering to young people? My God, I mean, he wants more dead kids in school. He wants the planet to warm faster, right? He wants, he's going to put ridiculous tariffs and destroy the global economy that's created all the wealth and opportunity in the United States. He wants 10-year-old girls to have, to be forced to carry their rapist child. And so, I mean, you go through this. Trump has no offering to young people. And I think the last thing I want to say, because this is relevant to the Israel-Gaza stuff that's happening on campus right now. I have 3 Gen Z kids who are 18, 21, and 23, and who are the exact age of many of the kids that are on college campuses right now. Mm-hmm. And their lives were radically altered by COVID. And and these young people right now, they want to get on with their lives. They don't want chaos. And it's one of the reasons that I think that what's happening on college campuses is actually, I wrote a piece about this yesterday that I think the protesters are blowing it. If they really try to disrupt graduations and finals in the next few weeks, there's going to be a massive rebellion against this movement, because these are the same kids, the 2024 class, all of them missed their high school graduation.
Yes.
All of them did. And they don't want this level of chaos in their lives. And I think the protesters are grossly misreading the room, in my view, about where their compatriots are. And we know from that same Harvard IOP poll that asked about what's the most important issue, of the 16 issues they tested, Israel Gaza was 15th, right? Way at the bottom. And it makes sense because the truth is, for most young people, having a good job, having health care, having the climate not warm, right? Having reproductive freedom and a democracy, these things matter more than this faraway war. And so I think we have to be a little bit careful not to exaggerate the level of support that the protesters have, particularly given what is an increasingly wild set of tactical engagement on this issue on campuses. I mean, what's happened the last couple of days, and I don't know how much people are reading about this, but there's now a clear effort in many campuses to disrupt graduation.
100%.
And that's just not going to endear millions and millions of people to this movement in the coming weeks, in my view.
Right.
So let me ask you something.
Yeah.
Can you speak to this sort of trope that has emerged that somehow Democrats are losing a substantial hunk of African American voters?
Yeah, listen, I think there's some evidence, right? The way I like to describe it is that it's obvious based on polling that some of our 2020 coalition is wandering right now, right? I mean, we're not at 51%. And I think that I think that our theory of the case is that as the campaign engages and people move through that process of being disengaged to becoming a likely voter and then a voter, that a big chunk of our coalition will come home. But then we have a campaign to go get the rest. And I do think there is some evidence that the shutdown Democrat argument that was made against us in 2020, had an impact with young men of color and young men in general. Even if you look at the current Harvard IOP poll, 18 to 24-year-olds are more Republican than 25 to 29-year-olds. And that's been repeated in other polling. These are people who grew up politically during Trump, particularly young men. I mean, I think young men under Trump liked the machismo, they liked some of what they saw. And they also, for young men who didn't have a lot of means, we became the party that wanted to shut the economy down. And it interfered with their ability to provide for their families. And so I think that my view is that these are things that we can fix over time. These are not immutable. I mean, the idea, I just want to take a step back, Stuart, because I can tell by the way you're asking the question, is that, there's no question that Republicans can win over minority voters. George Bush actually did a really good job with Hispanics. But the guy who's going to do it is the most, virulent racist in modern American history, who's, an anti-immigrant, xenophobe, anti-Semite, and all the things that he is, that he's going to be the one that has the racial breakthrough with young Blacks and Hispanics. I just don't buy it. I mean, I know it's a theory. I just think in practice.
I agree with you.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, I've said this before, if I ran the Democratic Party, I would wake up every day trying to get in a culture war. Because where the Republicans are is so distant from where the country is. They get in a fight with Colin Kaepernick and Nike. Who wins that? Nike makes $9 billion. They try to cure the problem with young women by attacking Taylor Swift. I mean,
how's that working out for you?
They at one point they were in a culture war with NASCAR because NASCAR was banning the Confederate flag. So, you're a Republican and you're in a culture war with NASCAR? Really? I mean, and I think it's just a misjudgment of where the country is. I think it's a sort of older person's view of what is happening, and it's like kind of a get off my porch, get off my lawn kind of view. And it's true in their obsession with trans, which I think, personally, I think is the fact that a lot of Republicans never became comfortable with same-sex marriage, just sort of shut up about it.
Yeah.
Right.
Because, but their sort of over-emphasis of trans makes it such a point of hatred that I think that's really out of sync. I mean, do your kids, to them, isn't gay marriage just sort of a given?
Yeah, it's just not important. It seems ridiculous, right, on the face of it for many people. And I think one of the other areas that you're describing, which is these sort of fantasy places that they go that are going to be helpful to them, right, is that these trials are going to help Trump. I mean, I think it's the most laughable.
Say more about that, Simon. I think that's a really important point for the audience to hear because this idea, and I've told people this before, when they say, oh, these are going to help Trump, every voter that would be moved to think that these trials are something good for Trump is already a Trump voter, in my mind.
Yeah, it's absurd. I mean, I honestly, there are a lot of crazy things that get said every day in our business. I mean, in 2022, probably the craziest thing we heard in the last month was that women clearly care more about the price of eggs than they do about loss of bodily autonomy, right? That was always one of the things that when I was on air, I couldn't believe people were saying. In this cycle, I think this notion that, oh, the Donald Trump being exposed as a serial criminal who's raped E. Jean Carroll in a department store dressing room, oversaw
Right.
one of the largest financial frauds in American history. He shared him, he stole America's secrets. He tried to overthrow the government of the United States. He and his family have corruptly taken more money from foreign governments than any family in American history. Yeah, go sell that. Just go ahead. Go ahead.
Give
Sell
that
it.
a shot.
Yeah, right. No, go ahead. You guys have been doing this a long time. Like, you got to be
Go
kidding me.
crazy.
Yeah, no one has tried to sell such, unbelievable negatives in American history. And I think the other thing in this fantasy place that they are, right, is Trump. I think one of the most amazing moments of the campaign so far for me was he believed he was so devious and smart that he came up with this threading the needle of letting abortion go back to the states, right? And not taking a position on it. And what he did, because he's an idiot and he's diminished and he doesn't really understand anything anymore, in my view, was that he ended up endorsing the most extreme abortion positions in the country. So Donald Trump is now for the Idaho abortion ban. That's okay with him, right? That's not only no ban, it's jail time for doctors, and it's also an anti-trafficking statute. I'm willing to bet that nationally that polls at 15, 18, 20%, right?
Oh, yeah.
And meaning that the entire Republican Party now, and you guys know this, right, are now defending a position that polls in the teens and 20s on an issue that people vote on. There has never been a modern party that has run on an issue that polls so poorly on something that people actually vote on, are going to vote on. And I think he thought he was kind of like this devious genius. And he just reminded us what A, that he's an idiot, and B, that he is now, without question, the most powerful abortion extremist in the country. And, it's like DeSantis is going to have to run and defend the 6-week abortion ban in Florida. That thing polls at 22%, guys. I mean, the physics of that, the political physics of defending that. It's hard,
It is. I've talked to Republican folks in Florida they're not afraid of losing the majorities in the House and Senate in Florida. They're not afraid of losing the congressional majority, but they do realize now, for the first time in 20 plus years, they have to go out and spend money and run races. Now, they'll have all the money in the world, but they have to go out and do the work now that prior to this redistricting allowed them to sort of skate by on. They have to go out and do all that work, and it's not easy. And it's all coming down to the fact that in Palm Beach, Tampa, Orlando, and Miami, there are meaningful numbers of pro-choice Republican women who are like, wait, 6 weeks? I don't think so.
Right.
So,
and it's going to happen in Arizona and Florida. I mean, we have tens of millions of women who are about to lose rights and freedoms that have been long held for many, many decades.
Yep.
And it's going to happen right in the middle of the election. And I don't think people talked about, well, could the Supreme Court do another Dobbs in 2024 and sort of change the trajectory of the election? It's possible that the combination of Arizona and Florida together becomes like another Dobbs-like moment in the election where people are waking up to the fact that, hey, man, these guys weren't just a threat in the past. Their threat is escalating. It's getting worse. MAGA is becoming more dangerous and more scary, particularly like go sell. You guys are strategists and pollsters. Go sell the restoration of an 1864 law, right? That I mean, what do we think that polls at? Like 7%, 8%, 9%?
I mean, Donald Trump is not a smart man, but he's a crafty man.
Yeah.
And when he saw that law, he realized it. He ran for the hills on it almost instantaneously. It really is going to cause, I think, a really meaningful amount of damage in Arizona. I also think it's going to have a knock-on effect in places like Macomb County and Oakland County in Michigan, in the Wow counties in Wisconsin, in Mecklenburg in North Carolina. Those are homes to where we have identified in our data analysis a meaningful number of Republicans who are pro-choice, or at least not extremists in their pro-life nature.
I think the way that I view it is that they may not be pro-choice, but they don't want the government involved in this, right?
Yes.
And that and it should be up to whether they will identify as pro-choice. Is that the notion that a party that's supposed to be conservative, right, is getting so directly involved in such intimate decisions is uncomfortable, right? I think for many Republicans and also independent women as well, right? And I think that there's this feels like an overreach, right? It's too much, too far. Yeah. And I think this is about to become, I think, a very before and after moment in the 2024 election, in my view.
I think that's very much the case. Stuart, go ahead.
Yeah, it's interesting. There was a time not that long ago when it was a true statement that more people were being governed by pro-choice Republican governors than anti-abortion Republican governors.
Right.
You had California, you had New York, you had Massachusetts, you had Pennsylvania, Vermont. All of these states had governors who were pro-choice. And that's one of the great sort of shifts. The party has become an anti-abortion party in a country that is more pro-choice than anti-abortion. Yeah. And I think you see that playing out, and it's a problem that it goes beyond Trump. It goes to the sort of the shrinking of the party. This whole concept that we're a big tent that we used to talk about a lot. Yeah. It just proved to be a complete marketing slogan, a fantasy.
So Simon, I wanted to ask you also, as we've watched, I think one of the big predicates about every election before the era of Trump used to be this idea that the president should have 50+% approval ratings to be safe. That Biden's numbers are historically so bizarrely low. Do you agree with the theory? Stuart's talked about it. I've talked about it. I think we're in an era of partisanship where it's going to be really hard for any president to hit 50% again.
Yeah, I mean, I also think that the problem with using, as we learned in 2022, using the approval rating as sort of a way to measure where things are, is that the most powerful force in our politics today is fear and opposition to MAGA.
Sure.
It's far more powerful than disappointment in Joe Biden. And we saw that. That's one of the reasons why Democrats just keep winning elections all across the country, even though we're supposed to be losing elections, when the party in power is supposed to be losing elections, and we keep winning elections. It's historically anomalous what's happening right now. And it's because for all the disappointment people may have in Joe Biden, the fear and opposition to MAGA is a far more proximate threat to them and a far bigger issue. And, the problem for the Republicans, and one of the reasons I remain, optimistic about our chances, is that the battleground states have really litigated these issues in 2018 and 2020 and 2022. There is an enormous amount of money that was spent educating voters in these battleground states about the threat of MAGA. They probably know more about it than people that live outside those battleground states. And it's why the fact that Trump ran as an even more dangerous and more extreme version of MAGA, and then did another idiotic thing by telling Nikki Haley voters and Nikki Haley that they weren't really welcome in their
I don't want
party.
you.
We don't want you. I mean, dude, you lost the last election. Don't you need to grow your vote? And what are you doing telling people to leave, right? Is that I think that there is this, they're pushing beyond what we all know to be some of the, I'm not a big fundamentals guy, right? Like, I don't really believe in that. I think every election's unique. But there is this issue that if everyone's been voting against geopolitics again and again and again, then running as a more virulent version of that politics, it's probably not a good idea, And particularly when the battleground, because we've had in 2022 MAGA was the thing that was litigated in these same states that Trump has to go win. And so there's an enormous reservoir of understanding that something has gone really wrong with the Republican Party in these states because they saw it through the actual Republicans in their own states. And remember just two quick things, right? In many of these battleground states, we've now had people get indicted, for trying to overturn the election. And I will leave you because I know we're going to be ending soon. I think one of the most interesting things that's happened in the last few weeks is in 2022, everyone euphemistically called this the Republicans had bad candidate problems, right?
Right.
Well, the bad candidate problems this cycle, in addition to Trump himself, are Mark Robinson and Kari Lake. And the question now is whether or not those two candidates are basically going to hand the Electoral College to Joe Biden. Because if Josh Stein wins in North Carolina by 8 points or 6 points, Joe Biden's going to win.
I don't think Trump can win it if Josh wins it by 8 points.
Yeah, no. And we've had 2 polls in the last week showing Stein up 8 and 9 points already, right? Without media and without, defining Robinson. And Kari Lake, right? We know all the things we just talked about. The fact that Trump has sent signals and told Kari Lake that she can't come to Mar-a-Lago anymore.
Right.
He needs to go salvage, that means that Trump's really worried about what's happening in Arizona. So I think that, I've always felt that we would win Pennsylvania and Michigan. Wisconsin's going to be a dogfight. But this new development of Robinson and Kari Lake having bad candidate, bad MAGA problems is, I think, becoming a major development in this election, and it's a very bad one for the Republicans.
I think so. Stuart, let's let you take it home.
Listen, I'm going to put Simon on the spot and say, Simon, if you were running the Biden campaign, I always hated questions like this when people ask this, but what do you think that they should be doing thematically and
I'm very hesitant to answer those questions because, as you guys know, because we don't know the data they're seeing. But all of you who've been in the game when you see data and you know things that other people don't know. But I'll just say 2 things. I think one is we have to be unrelenting about creating a sense of energy and intensity. Using a team approach. Joe Biden doesn't have to, play every instrument in the orchestra, right? He can be the chairman of the board, but we all have a lot of work to do. Those of us who want Biden to win, there's an important role for us to play to help amplify and create energy, intensity, and passion. It's what you guys are doing every day. And I don't want to discount that. The second thing is that I do think this question of chaos versus order is really important for us to be paying attention to, because I do think the country is still coming out of a period of enormous chaos with COVID, and people just want to get on with their lives. And we have to be the party of normalcy and define them as the party that's going to bring back this chaos, right? And then finally, I would like to see us doing better on the basic argument around the economy. I still feel like we're underperforming there. I don't know that we know as a party why. I don't know that there's a broad consensus view about that, but the campaign's got to keep working through that and not give up. And because I just don't know how we get done what we want to get done if we're in the same place on economic issues in November.
What do you think they should? What do you think the key to overcoming that is? What do you think they should be saying?
I think that the way I describe it is I think we've gotten on the wrong side of opportunity with some people, and that we have to reestablish us as the party, that wants to see everyone get ahead. And we have to, however that's conveyed. I think that during COVID, we got on the wrong side of opportunity with a lot of voters who believed we were shut down Democrats. And I think that stuff is kind of lingering for us. So I think that reestablishing, Joe Biden came out of the election in 2020 with an enormous deficit on economic issues to Trump. It's really, and we've never been able to get out of that, right? We won the COVID voters, and that's why we won the election. The campaign did a good job. But I simply, Stuart, and this is just a simple answer because we can talk about this for another 30 minutes, is that we have to be unrelenting about how we argue that we want everyone to get ahead, that we want you, with Democrats, you have a better life. And that, we have a strategy to keep doing that and take credit for the incredible progress that we've made. I think the fourth thing I would add, and this is actually the number one thing, is that I think Biden has to be more explicit about how, you elected me to get us to the other side of COVID, and I did successfully. And now I got all these other things to do. We can't let this notion that people believe that things were better under Trump, spook us from making the clear case that when Joe Biden came into office in 2021, he inherited one of the worst conditions that any president has ever inherited in American history. And today, as I put it in my, and I'll end with this, in my post on Hopium Chronicles, the Wall Street Journal just did a survey of economists, and the headline was "American economy is the envy of the world."
Yeah.
So, and we're not going to lose this election, but we are going to have to work through, I think, some internal democratic stuff about how we talk about opportunity, how we talk about the economy, how we talk about and be more bullish on the idea that we have made everybody's lives better. We can't shy from that, right? We got to lean into that hard because it's true. And we can't get spooked by their continued shouting about inflation and everything else. Joe Biden has been a good president. The country's better off. We have a strong case for re-election. And I feel like as I move all these chess pieces forward, I would much rather be us than them. And I think together we're going to kick their ass in November.
Well, Simon Rosenberg, as always, I appreciate you coming on the show. You are always a guy who brings people back into the frame, I think, where they need to be in terms of being realistic in a positive way about we've got a lot of challenges ahead, folks, but the night is not as dark as the Trump folks would like you to think it is. Simon, thank you so much. Stuart, thanks for joining us tonight, as always. There's great Resolute Square swag available on the website. And folks, we'll see you again next Tuesday. Listen to the Trippi Show. Listen to my show, The Enemies List. And we will talk to you again next week. Thanks, everybody.